Hello, everyone. This is Dan Wisenhunt, editor and publisher of Decatorish.com. Welcome to the June 10th edition of the Decatorish Twitch show. We stream on Twitch every Wednesday and Friday at 6 p.m., and we have got a great show for all of y'all today. We've got some really wonderful guests. We've got, of course, with us again, George Cheedy, our regular columnist. We've got Marjorie Hall with DeKalb Strong. We've got John Jackson, the chair of the DeKalb County Democratic Committee. We've got Balki Vu, who's on the DeKalb Elections Board, and we have columnist Hans Utz. And we were going to have Gabriel Sterling from the Secretary of State's office, but Gabriel is gone absent, so we don't know what's going on. Maybe he'll join. We could talk about it. But how's everyone doing today?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Thanks. Nice to see you guys.
Nice to see all of you as well. So we're going to just get right into the discussion, and then we will at some point stop and check out the reader comments. So, Marjorie, I want to start with you. What are kind of your observations about what we saw yesterday in our local elections? And just for readers who aren't familiar, who might be watching us from other places, yesterday we had our primary election and our presidential primary because both were the presidential primary got rescheduled to the May primary, and then both of those got rescheduled to yesterday because of the pandemic. And it was a mess. And we had as a consequence, we had two sheriff's races on the ballot, which was really weird. But anyway, Marjorie's with DeKalb Strong. They're a local advocacy group trying to reform DeKalb. What were some of your observations about what you saw yesterday?
Well, one of the things that we saw, which is a pattern that I noticed in our last primary election, is that there is a real appetite among voters, among Democratic voters, to vote for women. And sometimes that means that they will go to the polls and they will vote for the first female name they see on a list in some of these lower profile races where they're not really familiar with them and they don't really necessarily know who they're voting for, and they vote for a woman's name. And that is what we saw. Definitely, one of the biggest surprises for me of the night was in the DeKalb County Commission District 1 race, where you had Robert Patrick, who is a very a good, conscientious public servant. He has been on the Doraville County Commission. And I thought that he was going to win in a walk in the primary and then really be competition for Nancy Chester in the general. And a woman who was the only woman in the race who ran almost no campaign ended up winning that. She may be in a runoff. That's likely a runoff. But that was a real surprise. And that pattern was seen throughout, in that a lot of these lower profile races, I do think that people sometimes were just picking a woman's name because of that appetite to vote for women. So we have a lot of, the other big takeaway I had last night, we still don't actually know. We have not yet counted the absentee ballots, which is a huge chunk of the ballot. So some of these races may change a little bit, especially the ones that are close, but it's pretty clear we're going to have a lot of runoffs for sheriff, for a Superior Court seat, maybe for some House districts, and for commission districts 1 and 6. So I just want to encourage everybody, that's going to be August 11th. We got to do this again.
John, what about you? What did you see?
I mean, I noticed a lot of the same thing. You know, there are going to be a lot of runoffs. We are not used to this high turnout primary environment in Georgia. We are having just a different type of engagement than we had several cycles ago. And it is making some of these down ballot races very unpredictable because of who the top of the ballot turns out. Most people go out knowing who they're going to vote for at the top of the ballot. And then what happens down ballot, that can be a complete mystery sometimes, because, and if there wasn't a huge top of the ballot race, a lot of these races would go very different.
Balky, what is you were on the elections board. So first of all, what was your kind of takeaway from what happened yesterday? And do you have any thoughts on when we're going to see these absentee ballots counted and the
Oh yeah.
results reported?
Well, first of all, it's great for Marjorie to make that point, because for someone whose name sometimes butchered, and I'm called Becky at times, and if I ever run for office, then I'm going to run as a female. So actually, I just got the updated, right as of right now, literally 5 minutes ago, results. And so far, out of 529,000 registered voters in DeKalb, we're only at around 18% count right now, right?
Oh, wow.
And it's running about nationally. Well, I'm sorry, for the national races, it's running about a 9-1 edge in favor of Democrats, right? Couple of things I want to share with you all, and that's based on my experience. The problem is the fact that obviously you have a combination of things. The system itself, it's a new voting system, right? Second thing is the process, and third are the people. And for the new system, we had to train workers, sometimes brand new poll workers, virtually over the course of the last 8 weeks. So you don't have that knowledge and experience that you have from the old former poll workers who weren't, they didn't want to expose themselves. That's the first problem. Second, so that's inadequate training. Second problem is worker attrition. We had so many poll workers who say, I can't do it this cycle. And that forced us to go out and find people. And working as a poll worker is not a 350 week a day job. It's actually literally confined to 3 weeks at a time, 3 or 4 times a year. So it's extremely tough to find. Third issue we had, and we really had to deal with this over the last 8 weeks, is the fact that we had to find new polling locations anytime there's a polling location, whether it's a church or a library, that canceled out on us. Thankfully, like City of Decatur, you have 5 precincts cancel literally in the last 2 weeks. We are able to consolidate those two into 2 locations. But consolidation also meant you had a reduction of machines because of social distancing. You also had the physical social distancing that dragged these lines out. And so it really was such a big problem. I will say that the SOS office, they're blaming on user error, and I think that's kind of unfair at times. But I'll give you what George was sharing earlier, Marjorie were perhaps sharing, and John as well, and that is the MVP system. It was completely bogged down. So literally, as of yesterday morning, there were people contacting state reps and sending me, and the state reps would inquire about, how do we know a voter who sent in who returned a ballot has actually been checked off as voted, right? So we've got to do a better job at that, and that starts at the MVP statewide level,
George Cheedy was actually a poll watcher last night, so he was up super duper late and had to get up. Is really burning the candle at both ends, so we definitely appreciate his time. George, what did you...
Little loopy.
What were this could be an interesting show. What did you see yesterday? What were your sort of takeaways from the results that you've seen so far? And what did you see while you were doing your job poll watching last night?
So yes, democracy is broken and we are all going to die.
All right, thank you, George.
We knew that already, though. So, what new insights do you have?
It's fine. No, it's fine. Like what I saw was 10 poll workers uncorking absentee ballots in a stack 4 feet high on a table, like at midnight at 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'm looking at this like, you're not finishing that tonight. You're not finishing that tomorrow night. You might not finish that the day after tomorrow night. None of the results that we're looking at right now, not just aren't final, but might not even be predictive of what the actual result is. For example, like the District 1 race, like the one that we were referencing earlier, like bearing in mind, like the first commission district in DeKalb can be a little weird. Does anybody remember Holmes Piles from 2014? Like,
I do.
where Nancy Jester ends up in a runoff with an 86-year-old guy who'd never campaigned because he was the only one on the ballot who wasn't a Republican, and all the Democrats voted for him, and he ended up with 25% of the vote. You have the election so that your preconceived ideas about who's supposed to win actually get tested. But I don't look like I have a giant head. I have a giant bald head. I get it. Like, I think I know everything, and I don't. I'm a talking baked potato. But set that aside. I don't know this person who's in the lead right now, and I should. I know all the other candidates. I know everybody who's running for everything in this freaking county, and I don't know her. Like, and how is that possible? Like, I'm sure she's a lovely person, and if she ends up being the Democratic nominee, then I will wish her luck. But what? Like, what are we supposed to do? Like, as people who are like deeply engaged in the issues and policies of DeKalb County, when I look at an election result where I'm like, why are you winning? Nobody knows who you are. Like, this is when I want to, like, we were talking about this last night, the Sandra Bullock problem. Sandra Bullock from Cobb County, who isn't the real Sandra Bullock, although she's real to herself.
Isn't the actress Sandra?
Is not the actress Sandra Bullock. Didn't campaign, didn't knock on doors, didn't raise money, didn't return phone calls, never showed up to a forum, ignored news reporters, did not send out a mailer, and won 58% of the vote because her name was Sandra Bullock. Like, that's where we are right now. And it's crazy-fying my face. And that's all I have to say about it.
I wanted to ask really quick, Dan, could I ask Balki a question really quickly? I wanted to go back to some of the comments that he made around where some of the problems were. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Yep. So, I mean, Balki, you had mentioned the kind of people, process, technology, sort of standard holy trinity of consulting around, what some issues are with the election. But the only thing different for Georgia that we're dealing with in Georgia differently from any other state or anyone else that was holding a primary yesterday was technology, right? It really was. We're having the same pandemic problems. We're having the same virtual training problems. We're having the same recruiting problems. We're having the same, this isn't a professional job that people follow. And yet we fell apart in a way that no other state and no other, it's an absolute, there's no way to describe it other than an absolute fiasco. I mean, let's just start with that. And so how do we ensure this is not what happens in November?
Great question.
Pray.
I have no idea.
Pray. I tell you, here's the problem I have. You had 140 DeKalb County, you had over 150,000 absentee ballot requests. And out of that 150, we were at one point, well, first of all, over 120,000 as of last Saturday had been satisfied, meaning that the county had the chance to send out 120,000 absentee ballots into those households. Now,
surely we're not the first state that's had a massive absentee ballot request in this pandemic, though, right?
Well, no, that's right. And so the problem we have here is the fact that when we've got outside vendors, and you know this, you got outside vendors, and those outside vendors are going to send the ballot request in directly to you. So when there's a breakdown there, that's a big breakdown. And then second of all, I mean, frankly, I was extremely worried Monday morning when I was seeing emails requesting some sort of proof that they've sent out absentee ballots. So the breakdown is somewhere between the SOS, the county, and the vendors. And we cannot afford to be faced with this come November. It is unfathomable, right? Then you had a number of voters, I think, who are concerned that, when they sent in their absentee ballots, whether they've actually shown to be received. Because if they weren't shown to be received, then they felt compelled to go and vote a provisional ballot just in case. And so that probably added to the lines as well. It is, and George, what I tell you, we right now to have 20% results in after basically, close to 24 hours of the polls closing. This is the type of informational breakdown that Hans, I mean, you're sharing the concerns. I think that everybody, whether you're on the left or the right, everybody's got to be concerned about.
Well, I mean, look, I don't actually have a problem with taking a couple days to count the ballots, like as long as it's right and we get it. I have a problem with people being forced to be out of work for 7 hours and finally walking away from the line because they've only moved 60 feet and they're frustrated and they don't actually get their voice counted. Like it's not so much it takes us a week to get everything figured out, even though that does look a little banana republic. It's much more that those lines yesterday and the absolute compression of locations to vote and then the technical issues associated with voting in those locations, which felt correlative to locations where the current individuals in power didn't want the votes counted. It's just a bad look, right? I mean, and that's, I guess, where I worry a little bit. If you need to take the time to count, that's awesome. Take the time to count. But how do we avoid those catastrophic lines that we saw yesterday?
And on that note, we're going to do a little housekeeping real quick. So for those of you just tuning in, this is the Decatur.com Twitch show. If you're watching us and you want to comment and ask a question, create a Twitch account, give us a follow. Gabriel Sterling has texted me. He told me Gabriel Sterling works at the Secretary of State's office. He told me he is operating on little sleep. He's in the car. He is offering to join at some point. I told him we are mocking him endlessly, and he maybe that'll prompt him. But we like Gabe. We hope he joins us. Wanted to take a minute to just get to a couple of reader points. Alex Brown, our intern, who's doing just an amazing job and is frankly getting baptized by fire, covering all these protests right now. She's going to get a year's worth of experiences in this two-month internship, I'm pretty sure. But everyone was commenting. Got another follow. Thank you for following us. Let's see. I asked if anybody had any questions. Somebody said, I never got my ballots. I would not have gotten my ballot either had I not called the registrar's office several times, and they alerted me to a problem. They said I sent them something that was not, they didn't have the right signature or something. I don't know. My wife got hers, and I was like, okay, well, where's mine? And they said, you didn't fill out the paperwork. So I sent it. I got it on my birthday, thank God. And so I was able to drop it in the mailbox Friday. But even on Friday, there was a line at advanced voting on Memorial Drive. And I was like, uh-oh, this isn't good. So I kind of knew these elections were going to be a shit show. I mean, I'm not Nostradamus or anything, but just the way it was lining up, it didn't seem like it was going to work. But here's a question. I want to ask Gabe, if I can get him in the room, what would the problem have been if we just, rather than send everyone a form to request their absentee ballot, why didn't we just send every registered voter a ballot? Send them the Democrat or Republican ballot, have them fill out the one they want to fill out, and mail it in and drop it off. I don't understand. Like, I asked Gabe about this on Facebook, Gabriel Sterling with the Secretary of State's office, and his response was, well, that's complicated and the lists weren't clean enough, is what he said. Well, I mean, that couldn't have been any less complicated than the shit we were dealing with yesterday.
That's the most bureaucratic-ass answer I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah, so, John, do you want to dunk on this for a little bit? What's your thought?
I think there's some simple fixes here. Every precinct in DeKalb should have a few thousand paper ballots on standby, so we're not waiting to open a precinct. That's cheap. That's simple. Print them out. Have them waited. Like, okay, We're switching to paper ballots. Come this way. Come on, keep it moving.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that seems really simple. Second, our budget for the Board of Commissioners here, and not Board of Elections, and I talked to the Board of Elections. I talked to Susan Motter and Dele very, very often because they were appointed by us, the DeKalb County Democratic Party. I'm the chair, of course. And I'm wondering if our budget is enough to even have an adequate amount of staff. Relative to Fulton, the ratio of population of Fulton to DeKalb should be the same ratio of our budgets for the Board of Elections, and it's nowhere close. So I'm talking to you, Board of Commissioners. Are we putting enough money towards the Board of Elections? I say no, because we need more. I personally feel like they need more resources. So I think in DeKalb County, we need to do very simple things. Just in case things malfunction, we have a contingency plan in place to keep the ship going. But I don't think the Board of Commissioners, is giving the Board of Elections enough resources. I think they're being asked to work with too little for a county this size, if you ask me.
Balky, you're on the board. What do you think?
Yeah. So great there. Give you an idea. We absolutely don't have enough resources, but to compound that, with the new machines, every piece of paper that we print out so that a voter can actually verify who he or she has voted for costs us 13 cents. Because why? Because there's a contract with a vendor that's charging us 13 cents per piece of paper. So then what does that do? It eats away from the resources we have. Second of all, we've not historically been basically had a lot of resources, because when the county commissioners of DeKalb have allocated resources, we're one of the departments where to them it's not a regular operating department. But I will say this, that early on, late last year, there was a stakeholder group that was put together by Jeff Rader, Nancy Jester, and Marietta Johnson. And we initially put that together in order to sit down and kind of get the perspective. And John, we had Dele being part of it along with me, and then we brought in various other, voter protection groups in order to get a feel for the process. And that's exactly what we've been talking about, is we need more resources. Because why? Because not only do we need it to pay the poll workers who, before this year, they were literally getting paid for a poll worker. You're probably being paid about $180 to be out there for 12 to 14 hours a day, right? And it makes it extremely tough competitively in order to attract qualified individuals to do it. Now, I will say this too. What we had to do that was new in this environment was the fact that when you have a poll worker who tends to be going to be middle age or senior leave, then that institutional knowledge goes away, and to bring in somebody new requires a lot more training. So we absolutely need more resources, and that's something that we've been pushing back in order to get it straightened out. Yeah, that's right.
So, I mean, just using those numbers, just using those numbers you referenced there, Becky, I want to go back to that. John's suggestion about printing out a ballot and having additional ballots at the polling locations to prevent the catastrophes that we saw yesterday. Look, if we printed one ballot for every individual in the state of Georgia, all 10.2 million of us in the state of Georgia, at 13 cents, that's a tiny bit over $1 million.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think there's anyone in the state of Georgia that would say, you know what, maybe we spend $1 million to not have what we just saw happen yesterday. Like, that's so, if what we're talking about right now is a resource problem, what do we spend proportionate? Like, so what does Georgia spend proportionately on their elections versus South Carolina or versus North Carolina or versus Massachusetts, where we didn't see these catastrophic meltdowns? And are we that far out of balance with what these other states that aren't having these problems doing? Are we that far out of line with them?
Let's let Marjorie weigh in on this. Marjorie, what do you think? Does the Elections Board, Department of Elections, need more funding?
Well, it's hard for me. I don't have an answer to that. I'm not sure if they need more funding, but one of the points that I think is really important, because right now what we've seen is a lot of finger pointing on whether it is more of a county issue or whether it's a state issue. And there are people with the state who seem to say it is the county's jobs to run elections, not the state's job. So if there's a problem, then it's with DeKalb County, it's with Fulton County, it's not the state. But I think that it's really important to remember that DeKalb County had absolutely no say in these voting machines, which were decided on and purchased over some pretty compelling testimony down at the Capitol that they weren't the best of ideas. And so for the state to impose voting equipment without ensuring that every county is going to have consistent training and the resources they need in order to implement this kind of new technology, I think is very unfair. It's difficult to say that DeKalb has no power but all the responsibility, which I feel is kind of what the Secretary of State is saying.
More to the point, Marjorie, if I could just jump in right there, because I don't think they're just saying DeKalb. Really, what they're saying is urban centers, are having the problem. It's not the state's issue with urban centers around
right,
resource.
because it's only Fulton and only DeKalb. That's a narrative that I have seen, is everybody else is just fine. It's just Fulton and DeKalb. I think too. I would really like to see a more thorough analysis to really get an answer to if that is true or not. Where did we have these long lines? Are they isolated in Fulton or DeKalb? Or are they a little bit more widespread and we just got more information about them in DeKalb and Fulton? Of course, in more concentrated urban areas, you have a bigger challenge because you just have more people to handle.
The AJC reported Cobb and Gwinnett, just for the record. They reported that there were issues in Cobb and Gwinnett as well.
Absolutely.
I would expect them in any place that is.
Go ahead, Marjorie.
I would expect them in any place that has some density. That you're going to end up having more of these kind of problems. And I really do think that the burden should be on the state to ensure that all voters in this state have uniform access to the ballot.
Yep.
And if they are going to mandate certain voting equipment and procedures, they should also ensure that they are providing resources to everyone across the state.
George, you have been oddly quiet. George, what are you thinking?
I was a technology reporter in 2000, and I covered the debacle in Florida for Computer World, among other things, like the Brooks Brothers riot, the hanging chads, all the rest of it. Like even an experiment in internet voting that like the military had started. And my sort of broad conclusions based on that experience is that voting is really actually pretty hard. Like whatever else is going on, we have this idea that like, oh, show up, push the button, get the ballot, count the ballot, and it's done and it's easy. And it's not, and it's never been easy. And elections are screwed up all the time, all over the country. It sucks. That said, $200 a day for a poll worker, 10 poll workers at a poll, 200 poll workers, that's $500,000. Give or take.
Guess who joined?
We have a day. Gabriel Sterling is here.
A wild Gabriel Sterling appears.
I approve. He's going to tell me better things than I'm going to say. Short answer is, like, DeKalb County's budget is $1.4 billion. If you told me we're going to blow $1 million on elections in a year, I wouldn't blink. It's one of the few things that a county government is actually obligated to do. Like, they have one job, do the democracy thing. So spend the money. Like, of all the things to spend the money on, you really can't fight that one. Who's going to say, nah, screw your elections? We don't need to spend. Like, who's the person who's going to stand up and argue against this? That's the thing I'm trying to figure out.
So for everyone just joining us, this is the Decatur-ish.com Twitch show. We have got quite the panel today. And in addition to Marjorie Hall with the DeKalb Strong, John Jackson with the DeKalb Democrats, Bauke Vu with the local elections boards, our columnists, Hans Utz and George Cheedy. We have a friend of mine, Gabriel Sterling, who works with the Secretary of State. You're the chief operating. I don't have my notes in front of me. You're the chief operating officer there.
Not right now. Right now, my title is officially statewide voting system implementation manager. All my efforts.
Okay. So Gabriel and I've known Gabriel since I was a reporter in Sandy Springs. So I've known Gabriel a long time. We have been raking the state over the coals for the last 30 minutes until you got here. So I'm glad you joined us. So explain to us how this is our fault, and not the state's
Not
fault.
the voters' fault.
Not
Let
the-
me start
okay.
with that.
What happened? What happened yesterday?
Biggest thing, training. I mean, essentially we're still getting all the reports in from everywhere. But as you know, the epicenter of the issues was in a particular county. It happens to be my home county, Fulton County. And I think anybody who's ever been around elections, and frankly, I've been around them for a long time, there hasn't been an election where Fulton County couldn't find some new way to mess something up. So it is unfortunate, and we see it every time. They've been fined hundreds of thousands of dollars. But last night on WSB TV, you heard Rick Barron say himself that the first time many of their poll workers saw and touched these machines was yesterday when they showed up at work. So if you have never trained anybody, if you're hiring people on the Saturday before, and the state was consistently asking Rick and their team, how are you on people? How are you on people? How are you on people? We're good. We're good. So yes, they had human beings there, but they didn't have them trained well enough to be able to work with the equipment.
There's a Twitch comment to that point. Sarah says, my son applied to work at the polls, and they told him they didn't need everyone, and she says she need anyone, so she lives in DeKalb. So there is actually a point to that comment.
And listen, we would love more people to sign to be poll workers. We had, as an example, I'm still trying to track this down to make sure it's correct, but we had to secure the vote page that we were running at Secretary of State. 300 people in Fulton signed up, and as near as we can tell, Fulton contacted none of them. I mean, this is a systemic issue, unfortunately, there, but our staff has already started meeting with their staff, and we've literally asked questions, what can we do to help? Because the one thing I know is like the state screwed up, the state's horrible. Do you think the state wanted to be viewed that way and have me go on CNN last night and try to fight with Chris Cuomo? No, we want nice, boring elections. That's our goal. When you sit there, you go in, you pass the vote. Now, this is extraordinary times, and let's give some grace to some of the counties. Fulton County, especially at the front end, they had somebody die from COVID, and it was tragic, who was there dealing with the absentee ballots. And then the man who runs the absentee ballot program got COVID. So they were behind the ball for about a week, and nobody, when he was in the hospital, essentially nothing happened on the absentee ballots. So we ended up having to open an investigation on them because, as it turns out, people were able to email them in or mail them in. And they made a decision internally to, we're going to process all the mailed ones first, regardless of when they came in, and then go back and do the other ones. We have emails showing them saying they got 20, 30,000 of these on May 20th, going back to April 2nd when they first started coming in. So on that front, that's a really bad thing. Another thing they couldn't help necessarily, even though we tried to get them to do something different. Because of COVID, they lost a lot of voting locations. The second reason they lost voting locations is it's summertime. Brady High School is usually a nice big voting location, but they're doing renovations, so they couldn't have access to that. So they put 16,000 people, 16,000 registered voters at Park Tavern. So when they open the doors, there's 350 people in line. And when you have spacing and COVID, you can only let 8 or 10 at a time. So we're looking at a few things, but that's the biggest thing. And then simple training issues. Putting the card in, troubleshooting number one. If it doesn't activate the card properly, flip the card over. Troubleshooting number one. We sent checklists out to them. They had these. They didn't know they were there. Another problem, and we told all the counties, and let's keep something in mind with some perspective. There's 159 counties in Georgia. About 150 of them had zero issue. None. And I'm going to do something real quick. I came in, there was a storm earlier today.
I was just going to say, somebody's got a microwave or something. Your baked potato's done.
And I was resetting the clock for when the power went out.
Okay.
And it's been beeping and driving me crazy, but I'm trying to get my points across.
Thank Christ.
So I apologize for
about
y'all.
Dude, you've got a nice house.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
that?
Your house is nice.
Getting a
It's not
grand
that big.
tour.
It's only like 1,900 square feet. But no, I just bought this thing. I got this. Y'all have seen me on Facebook and everything. I cook, so I got a big ass kitchen.
Oh yeah.
So,
Gabe
So
is the master.
I mean, I want to ask real quick, Gabe, because the
Question
reality
for Gabe.
is, yeah, I mean, you mentioned 16,000 people in a single voting center in Fulton County at the Park Tavern, which is,
Yeah.
I mean, just that's asking for catastrophe. But 100 of the 159 counties that are in Georgia, like 145 of them don't actually have 16,000 people total in the county, right? So this is going to be why. No, but you hear what I'm saying, though, right?
Yeah.
Like you're just not going to have the same density problems, right? Like new technology deployed in a pandemic when you're having to recruit and train people remotely prior to the first election that's held in those circumstances, it's going to be the urban environments that have.
And listen, we said that from the beginning. We said there's going to be longer lines. You got to. Why in the world do you think a Republican Secretary of State said, "Hey, we're going to send out 6.9 million absentee ballot applications to everybody so they can all use this great no excuse absentee thing"? And as we sit right now, we haven't finished the counting. We are probably at 1,100,000 people took advantage of that. Now, imagine one thing. Imagine we didn't do that and how yesterday would have looked.
Yes.
So, and another thing to recall, 325,000 people took advantage of advanced voting in person during a pandemic where these machines were used, and it was fine. So, I mean, and that's a record, by the way, for any primary or presidential preference primary.
Let me, Dan, you asked the question about why not just send
the ballots? That's right. Why not just send
why not just send an absentee ballot to everyone?
You know, want to know why? A, it's against the law in Georgia. That's the easiest one. But B, logistically speaking, and this is where you get into the vagaries of list maintenance and all those fun things that everybody wants to talk about. We discovered by sending out these absentee ballot applications that our list is got a lot of bad addresses and people who've moved.
Yes, it does.
And
well, on a proportionate basis, how many?
Before.
But I mean, let me just get into the nuance of the detail because I think this is important for folks to understand. On a proportionate basis, how many? Right? Like not an absolute number, but really out of the voting block of individuals.
If I'm spitballing,
yeah.
Because I'll walk through some of the. You want to get into the weeds of this? I'm absolutely able to do it.
Yeah, sure.
All those came back into the counties. Everything had a return address to the particular county. They need to now go into the ENET or voter registration system and say, you know, put them into the thing. This address had a return address. That's one of the ways you start putting people on the inactive list to start that process of moving them off. And if I'm spitballing, and this is going to be anecdotal, we're talking 20% probably.
20%.
Yeah, and this is a spitball. It could be.
Yeah, I believe that.
There are private sector systems out there, though. There are private sector systems out there that maintain addresses for commercial bases.
This wouldn't be a problem. We have
but I mean, so all I'm saying
around us that we can't do that.
But so let's have a conversation about that. Like, what's required to make that kind of a change so that we don't see what happened yesterday? That's like so. Like, I recognize that we're operating in an environment where there are regulations.
You have to change the Voting Rights Act, the National Voter Registration Act. There's a couple of other laws that federally kind of put the parameters up on this right now.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just.
All right. One at a time. George, you.
I got somebody else's.
Marjorie's been so patient, though.
Marjorie, we'll go George and then Marjorie. George, go.
I got somebody else's absentee ballot in the mail.
Oh, wow.
Like, I had somebody else's vote in my hand. And I sort of backed through figuring out how the hell that happened. And it was because somebody was registered to vote at using my post office box from 8 years ago, who got the absentee ballot request, put it in, hadn't changed her voting address, hadn't voted in the last 8 years, but by God, she's got an absentee ballot request in her hand and she's going to do it. And so the absentee ballot ends up in my hand. And I'm thinking that's probably like not that uncommon in the sense that people, like a lot of people who didn't vote for a long time decided, yeah, I'm pissed off. I'm going to vote this year.
I mean,
John, go ahead.
I've seen that working on campaigns before. It is very, very common where you will be talking to people in neighborhoods and they're like, are you registered to vote? And at this address because we don't see them on our voter roll, and they're actually registered somewhere else, and we have to register them at the place that they've been living for several years. So, I'm probably going to get shouted at about this. That's probably why I don't freak out about every purge, because I'm like, well, every purge is not necessarily just arbitrarily eliminating folks from the voting roll. Some of these folks have actually left the area, period. Aren't voting.
And that's actually what I was going to say.
Go ahead.
And I will, and I know that John has had the same experience that I has when you're working with candidates and you're trying to cut lists, try to canvass in an apartment complex, and like nobody's there. None of the names are right. Nobody still lives there. Half these people probably aren't still in the state. And the Secretary of State, and I can't believe I'm defending the Georgia Secretary of State's office. I'm surprising myself right now. But when they do try to do list maintenance to try to clean this up, people freak out about the voter purges. And so that is the challenge they have. They try to address this problem of a lot of people who don't live there anymore, who may not be in the state, and they try to clean it up, and people freak out. So it's a real challenge for them.
No, that's no excuse to people being purged who should not have been purged. That definitely doesn't need to happen. But I will say, I am not against keeping an update voter file.
Well, let me say a couple of things that we're working on that now. Since y'all are big old political dorks like me, I mean, you probably saw that we signed up for the electronic registration information system, the ERIC, which has now got 28 states where we exchange our lists back and forth so that we know. One of the issues we have right now, there is no impetus. It's not on the voter. Say I moved to Texas. It's not my job to call Fulton County and say, hey, by the way, I moved to Texas, take me off the list. But what happens now is I'll move to Texas, get my driver's license, and then I'll be registered there. And then when we do the information exchange, like, hey, this guy's registered in Texas now. He has this many points. This is the same person. Y'all can work towards, getting him moved over. It also works with national change of address. And that's one way we can clean the list. The second way, and most people don't understand this, we are an automatic voter registration state. So when you get your driver's license, you have to say, hell no, don't put me on the voter registration list. Otherwise, you're on. So one of the good things we have from that's really cleaning up those county to county moves. If people will get their driver's license changed over, and we're seeing about 10% of that. We've been on there since 2016. So our lists are actually a lot cleaner than other states' lists are right now, because of really attacking it from these two sides, the driver's license and then ERIC when we get that whole process going.
Balki, you've been quiet. What are your thoughts on this discussion?
No, I absolutely agree with Gabe, and Gabe knows my background as well as my wife's background. I will say this, Gabe, I think the MVP system, there's a way to improve it, because I was still getting inquiries as of Tuesday morning from some of the House delegation members of voters who sent in their absentee ballots. So they cast their votes, but they don't know where it is in the whole chain, right? So that's got to be somehow streamlined.
Well, it's not necessarily streamlined. Our issue, we tried to pass a bill to have a cutoff of states. And then you would have time for the workers to take that. I've got your vote. I can put it in the ENet. It's really a process flow issue, not so much MVP itself.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Balki.
And the last thing, I think what I do think, and Gabe, I don't think ordinary Georgians would know the complexities of having the VRA, which is the Voting Rights Act, the NVRA, which is the registration side, and even the UOCAVA, which is intended to allow time for military uniform officers from personnel from across the world be able to cast their votes. Those things actually interplay, so it ties the state's hands at times in terms of the calendar and the timelines of getting votes out and then getting that back in. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, we had a call with the Legislative Black Caucus on Friday, and they were asking, well, can we extend the time that you can start sending ballots out, because right now the code says we're only allowed to start sending them out 45 days beforehand. So what if we did it at 65? I said, while we're not opposed to something like that, the only problem is that would only be effective in the general primary. because of the UOCAVA rules around the National Voter Registration Act, we have a 9-week runoff time. So they said we want to make it 65 days. I'm like, that's great. Election day is 63 days beforehand. Then we have to go to the following Friday to certify the election. And we can't start building ballots until we certify the election. So we are so tight on time right now. We have 11 days to build that ballot and get it out and prepared for UOCAVA in all 159 counties. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. People think, oh, just extend the deadlines. Oh, do this. There's a lot of work to be done, like Balki points out.
Let's do a little housekeeping real quick. This is the Decatur-ish.com Twitch show. If you are just tuning in, if you want to ask some questions, create yourself a Twitch account, give us a follow, and jump on in our chats. We stream every Wednesday and Friday at 6. We have a lot of guests today. We have Gabriel Sterling, who works at the Secretary of State's office. We have Hans Utz, who is a columnist for us. We have John Jackson with the DeKalb County Democrats. We have George Cheedy, another columnist for us. We have Marjorie Hall with DeKalb Strong. We have Balki Vu with the local elections board. And I just want to read some comments off real quick. I told our readers we appreciated him being patient. Vesmith asks, are poll workers typically all day, or do they do shifts?
Again, the Secretary of State's office doesn't deal with poll workers directly. But I will say from most of what I've seen, they're usually, it's beyond all day. They show up at 5:36 in the morning, and they're staying until 7. I mean, obviously, polls close 7, 8 o'clock, 8:30 at night. So it is an all-day kind of thing for the most part.
Another comment from Vesmith. Vesmith says, the system should be instrumented for the public to see the metrics of counts, as well as check the reg and vote status, the registration and vote status. Is that, Gabe? You frowning? What's your?
I'm not following what the question is there, and okay. I apologize.
No, it's okay. I might be getting lost in Twitch. We'll come back to that. So if you want to join us on chat, got questions for our panelists, we typically wrap up at 6. So we got about 10 minutes left if anybody's got some questions. So is anybody in the panel have more questions or thoughts to discuss with Gabe?
If I could ask a couple questions,
sure.
As sort of a lay person not familiar with the laws and associated restrictions around what we're describing. And I appreciate that there's 42 different acts that you guys have to comply with, and how the intersections of those really jack your calendar up. Like I got that pretty loud and clear. What has to change? So if we're talking about legislative adjustment to not see what we saw yesterday and to actually address a lot of what we're seeing across the board, because it's not just this. I mean, it's not just this. Like, it's not like we're not going to have more technology going forward. It's not like we're not going to have more complexity going forward, right? And so what does need to change? Does there need to be some synthesis of all the governing regulations? Does there need to be additional time?
What we're doing right now.
Okay.
We had a bill that passed the Senate and then the House now. And this one is really specific because one of the things the Secretary Raffensperger really hates is lines. So we have a bill right now that says if you have a polling location that's over 2,000 people, and if at any given time during the day you have an hour-long wait, you as the county will now either have to split that precinct to spread those people out better, or deploy more machines to that location. Now, that would have helped us in COVID time because you can only let 4 to 6 or 5 people in at a time. But in a regular, hopefully back to that term I hate so much, new normal, we'll be back to a place we can do that. That's one. Two, if you read Twitter and Facebook, we are the czars of elections and direct counties what to do. And we send the poll workers out. We load the trucks. None of that is true. But we have a lot of the responsibility with literally zero authority on the front end. So when we see counties like Fulton, we've been having some discussions, and I think the Secretary announced today, y'all may remember there was this law that allowed the governor to step in and say, you school system have screwed the pooch. You failed. I'm stepping in, putting in receivership, taking the board out, of the supervisor out. So we're looking at doing a similar thing with objective criteria to allow probably the state elections board to kind of govern and look at that. So there's a board of people with Republicans and Democrats alike that will say, y'all as an organization are not getting the job done. And maybe just putting that backstop in is enough to maybe get some of these counties to really focus on what they need to do. But it's not money. Fulton County was given $15 million. But part of the problem they had is they recruited poll workers, they hired them from temp agencies, and they were there to get checks, and they didn't care. One of the reasons that a lot of these smaller counties or even big counties that use neighborhood people, they care. They're going to own an issue. They're going to figure it out. I mean, we had reports. It's people. At the end of the day, it's people and it's training and it's getting people who care about making sure that everybody gets to vote.
So, Susie,
go ahead.
No, Susie Baker has a question. Maybe Balky can address this. Does anyone know the status of absentee vote counting in DeKalb? George posted that about 95K were shared. How many have been counted?
I'm curious about that too.
Balky?
You're muted, Balky.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry about that. So let me pull out the numbers I got literally 45 minutes ago. The number of absentee ballots that have been counted are only by around 25,000, but we had over 150,000 requests. So we have a long ways to go, and even that process of counting is very and complicated. Because why? Because normally in the past elections, you only had the opening of these absentee ballots on the day of. This time with the Secretary of State's office, we were granted a 1 week head start, meaning June 1st of last Tuesday. I think to answer Hans's question, this is a classic case of the law of unintended consequences over time that results from legislation that's passed on top of legislation that's passed on top of legislation. Because anytime that happens, then you've got so many different competing pieces that basically tie the agencies, whether they're at the state level or at the county level, into being forced to do certain things. And that's always a complex organizational issue in the first place.
Have we ever benchmarked that against other states? Like, have we ever taken a look at what we do and how what we do leads to what happened yesterday versus what other states do?
So, Gabe, I don't know whether you were aware, but in DeKalb, I mentioned to them earlier that we've got a stakeholder working group that had reached out to a couple of the out-of-state consulting groups, right? Who have previous.
We talked to them too, Amber McReynolds and some of the other.
Yeah, exactly.
I think they gave really good recommendations.
That's right. So, I mean, we're hoping that DeKalb actually takes this a series of recommendations and actually perhaps be able to somehow find a way to benchmark it. But it's extremely difficult because no one state, and this is federalism, no one state actually has the exact same process any other state. So it makes it for you're shooting into
and just so that the viewers are listening, it's not just that we don't have the same process; it's that we don't have the same laws that permit us the same flexibility that other states may have.
And we've got a question along those lines. I think it's for Gabe. This reader asks, earlier someone said, I believe it was Gabe, the state can't just decide to mail ballots to all Georgians because of the Voting Rights Act. Question, did I hear that right? If no, I did, how do other states do it? How do voters in Washington State and Oregon vote by mail? Exactly. And sorry for all the questions. If we want that, what can citizens do to influence that change?
I think they're conflating two answers I gave earlier as to the list maintenance side. Okay. It was part of that. What they do is, first, you'd have to change state law, because state law literally says you have to request an absentee ballot for every election unless you are 65 or over or have a disability. You can request one time, and then you're put in what we call the rollover list. So no, that was about the list maintenance thing. So no, that's not in the way of it. But for a lot of those states, like Washington, like Oregon, like Colorado now, they spent 6-8 years getting all the pieces and parts put together to make sure their lists were correct and educating people. We stood up our absentee program in 6 weeks and got 1,100,000 people to use it. So from our point of view, it was very successful because it really did take pressure off the election day locations. And benchmarking these things, Hans, there's two different things. You have like the legal things, and then there's never been in the history of the United States a perfect election. We saw California, and that was worse than ours. Like Los Angeles system, they literally had to replace 50% of the equipment. Change it out, put it back in. and they had gigantic lawns, and they thought they had it all figured out, and they didn't. But because California is California, and it was in the same kind of communities in Georgia where we had long lines, but they're California, they're allowed to do that. And everybody's like, oh, that's just a new system. You know, they're really trying. But in Georgia, that happens. All of a sudden, we're massive vote suppressors, and everything is terrible. So,
I mean, Gabe, if I could respectfully jump in on that point, you know, I feel, and everyone knows I'm a fairly left-leaning person. I don't make a secret of that, but I try to be fair. You know, I think Brian Kemp, being the Secretary of State and overseeing his own election, did a lot of damage to the credibility of that office. And
there's a higher bar in Georgia right now,
right,
and that is not anyone's fault but Brian Kemp.
Yeah, Brian Kemp doing what he did and not stepping down damaged the credibility and the integrity. You know, whether the election was I'm not going to say it was rigged, but people distrusted it because of Brian Kemp being in that office. And I think, frankly, that's why the Georgia Secretary of State's office is under such scrutiny now, and probably will be for a long time.
We anticipate.
I want to make.
And I want to add too that it wasn't just that he. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
It wasn't just that he oversaw his own election. There actually was precedent for that, but he made voting partisan when he. And there was a great article in the AJC this weekend when there were reports that there were security problems with the voting website in Georgia, and he was warned about them. Kemp's response was to say the Democrats are hacking the election website and to refer it to the GBI for investigation. And it was all utter BS. It was legit security flaws and legit Homeland Security tests on a website with security problems. And I don't know if he knew that. He should have known that. But he turned it into a highly partisan, accusing Democrats of hacking the website. He made it an extreme voting rights, an extremely partisan issue.
Well, Marjorie, let me step in on that. Did Brian do that, or was he responding in kind to Stacey Abrams? And I don't hate to get partisan. I'm here in my government role to a degree, but I'm also friends with Dan, and I'm not going to stay quiet on this. Stacey Abrams, like, these 58,000 people are on the list, and they can't vote. It was a lie. Utter total lie. If they walked in with their driver's license, they could vote. But it became, oh, these people are being denied the franchise. It was a lie. She knew it was a lie, and she kept on saying it because she was able to raise money on it and say they are suppressing votes. It was never true. So if you want to say that he made it partisan, she made it just as partisan. So both sides in a campaign, oh my gosh, that's going to happen.
John, you're on. John, you want to weigh in?
Time in here. Voter suppression is not necessarily intentionally suppressing the vote, making it harder to vote. It can happen by incompetence. It can happen by an office not executing it the right way. I would say, rhetoric-wise, I would say the rhetoric that sometimes comes out of a Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State is an elected official. They should refrain from the, rhetoric that makes folks think that they're going to manufacture a crisis of voter fraud when we know voter fraud is actually pretty rare. It's been proven to be pretty rare, but that's besides my point. My point is that incompetence, in my opinion, is the biggest form of voter suppression, because when you don't do your job properly,
totally agree with you. Those people on the ground who are supposed to
stops the vote from happening. And I feel like if we want to solve the voter suppression issue, we have to make it about everybody doing their job correctly, from the Secretary of State's office to the counties. And I would like to see the Secretary of State's office be a little more transparent on maybe where they could improve and how they are trying to improve how they run the election statewide.
So,
Okay.
so I want to
think I
jump
just
in
said-
and say we are at 7 o'clock. I don't mind continuing this discussion. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So if anybody needs to drop the meeting, that I'm not going to hold it against you. But we are at 7. I've got a couple of reader questions as well. So do you want to keep going for a little bit?
Well,
Can I respond just for 1 second on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Gabe.
And while I do that, I hope you don't mind. It is 7 o'clock, and I need a beer.
Okay,
So,
go for it.
way
the,
ahead of you.
the main thing, you're good. The main thing that we were even talking about earlier is we've entered ERIC. We partnered with the King Center to do as many demonstrations as we could pre-COVID. We're trying to reach out to every community and to tell them how to use these election systems properly. So we've been working really hard at trying to get people to understand this new system and get out there and do it. We have ERIC. We have been, and you can ask Dan and some of the other media folks, we very rarely turn down an opportunity to talk and tell our story. I mean, this is one of the few things I want to make everybody understand. Our automated voter registration means that 90% of eligible voters in the state are registered to vote right now. We have 3 weeks of advanced voting, including a mandatory Saturday, which Stacey Abrams herself said in congressional testimony was the gold standard. And we have no excuse absentee voter. You know, there's 2 states in the nation who have it that good, Oregon and us. We're literally one of the best, easiest places in the country to vote. We're one of the easiest places to register. I mean, it's the online voter registration system's been online since 2014, automated since 2016 with an opt-out on it. So
Gabe, I'll give you, hold on. I'm going to give you easy to register, but I can't give you easy to vote after yesterday. That's just not, that doesn't comport to the facts, man.
Okay.
Like that's not true.
Explain something to you. We give them the machines. We train the trainers. COVID was a situation that every other county managed to, like Balke said, DeKalb had some issues, but not nearly the level that Fulton did. Fulton had it systemically from the north to the city of Atlanta to the south. And again, it was training. And I think it was the level of caring of some of those poll workers who didn't really give a crap in some ways. They're there for their paycheck. They'll get it. They won't. And that was really mainly in Fulton. But there's other counties that had some issues because it was new to them too. It was new to everybody. And Fulton County, we're going to really focus on trying to work with them and give them, they've been given everything they need, but they've really got to work better on training and getting a different kind of worker as opposed to somebody who's there for a check.
So St.
Is that comported with research? I mean, have we looked at actual research on the impact that temp workers versus community workers have? I mean, is that substantiated in any research?
100% my own anecdotal watching how it's happened and the things I'm trying to figure out why it works in some places.
So it's a hypothesis, but it's not proven. And I actually think it's probably a pretty reasonable hypothesis, but I don't want to misstate that has been actually shown. Like that's one of the things that has to be investigated, but there are probably a dozen things that have to be investigated to determine what happened yesterday.
Hans, I normally go around and I do drive around precincts, and historically when you get into a precinct and you see the people there, they tend to be the ones who've actually been poll workers 2 years ago, 4 years ago, and 6 years ago, and so forth, right? So that level of institutional knowledge is critical. Now, when you get down to this perspective, then again, it's a confluence of the new equipment, training new workers who have never been in that environment before, combined also with the fact that, let's say, for instance, Decatur Heights, if we normally would have had 8 machines this time, we would now have 4 machines due to social distancing requirements. So then
we're not the first election that's been held in a COVID environment, right? I mean, and so I'm gonna grant that new equipment and the training associated with new equipment throws a wrinkle into our process that probably wasn't experienced elsewhere.
But we're one of the bigger states, though, because when you think about it, we are now the 6th or 7th largest state in the nation. So we are one of the bigger ones. Nevada is going to be much smaller than us, right? And then, so I think Ohio.
But it's a question of density of population, not necessarily gross population, right? So if you take what happened in Las Vegas versus Atlanta is probably really similar.
If you plan properly and we have been working with the counties to say, for years when they had the DREs, they could start getting these mega precincts because it's really easy just to deploy on the DRE to get more people to go through. And one of the things they did in a lot of these counties and in Fulton included to a degree, they said, we have some pretty good poll workers. Let's say there's 3 precincts, and you have 2 precincts with pretty good poll workers and 1 precinct where they just suck. All your problems come from this one. Your life is a lot better as a poll manager and election director. Shut that precinct down, put them with these 2 precincts with people who know what they're doing. Yep. And that's what a lot of they did. So we've been working with them since really last year when we came into office, said, you need more precincts. This is a different kind of system. We showed them numbers that said, if you have people coming in at a steady rate from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., you have people voting their ballots, and you have 1 scanner in a precinct, okay, which is the standard way that things are deployed. You can only get 1,725 voters through that precinct in a day. And it never happens that way in real life. They have a big rush in the morning. You get a rush at lunch. You get a rush in the evening. And there's no possible way bringing in paper changes everything these election directors have done for 20 years.
So George looks skeptical. So I'm gonna jump to George real quick because he looks skeptical. George,
well, you know what I'm skeptical about? The thing I'm thinking about right now. Gabriel, did you say that you gave not you personally, gave $15 million?
The commission, the Fulton County Commission gave Rick Barron $15 million to run this election.
How many precincts are there in Fulton County?
Normally there's 300, and again, I'm spitballing here, 320. They had to close about 40, 45 of them to collapse them down.
Okay. And how many poll workers are there typically at one precinct?
In Fulton, there's normally 5 or 6 at a minimum.
Where the hell did they spend $15 million then?
Did anybody here vote in Fulton? Just me?
I did not.
They didn't use they took the stuff that we gave them. You know, they got more machines than anybody else did. And just so everybody knows, the minimum number of BMDs in every county is 1 for every 225 active voters. So they have that many machines. And they have these giant cases they put them in. And it has a scanner on one side and 2 BMDs attached to it and 1 cord to plug in. It's actually not that bad of a brilliant idea if you have $15 million to spend on things, because instead of pieces and parts of putting things together for the poll workers, they literally have to plug it in, and it should be good to go into the UP. And they have the UPSs inside of the cases and everything, and that's how they're deploying their machines. That's one of the big expenditures they did. I do not know how much that was.
All right, so we're going to jump in real quick and get to a few more Twitch questions before we close everything down. Follow up to the earlier question. Is the Voting Rights Act in the way of list maintenance that you want to do? If it is, how much is it federal versus state legislation?
The main thing that kind of governs this is the NVRA that Balki was talking about before. Those are the main things having to do with that, the National Voter Registration Act, because you can't do list maintenance anytime 90 days before any federal election. So literally in even numbered years, you can do no list maintenance at all. You can't do anything. You can do in the odd numbered years, but you have to have started the process of dealing with those people under our new state law now, either 5 or 7 years earlier. So, and now we also have two sides of the equation. Is when you first go on the list, we send you a thing going, hey, we don't think you're there anymore. Send us some notification that you're there. And now under HB 316 we passed last year, we send another mailing that says, hey, we're really, really serious. Are you there anymore? So we send 2 notifications to them to get off that. So there's a lot of rules about how often you have to have these contacts with these people. And then we have state laws that are kind of funneled from the NVRA. They kind of fall within those parameters. And I'm not a lawyer. This is kind of the, 3,000 or 30,000 foot high level from the lawyers telling me how that works.
So St. Louis man says Gabe, Secretary of State, is correct about being easy to register. Best opt-in voter registration in the nation through DMV. So you got somebody that agrees with you. And what are you drinking there, Gabe? That's my question. What are you?
It's pseudo local. It's the Terrapin Up High IPA. It used to be the High Five, and somebody sued them because they had that name already.
That looks delicious.
It's actually one of my favorite go-tos.
St. Louis man also asks, why can't Georgia adopt ranked choice voting so that we don't need runoff elections or even primaries for that matter? And we've been hearing a lot of discussion about those.
I've got my own personal things on that one. I love runoffs. I mean, y'all know my old life was a political consultant. I think everybody should just slog it through and fight it out. But ranked choice voting, it's not the panacea a lot of people think it is. It's not going to be, there's be no more negative campaigns. In fact, there have been studies, Hans, to your point, that shows it can actually increase negativity because you're trying to squeeze people out in smaller and smaller groups to get to that second choice. And it would take some work. There is some discussion, both Republican and Democrat, in the legislature to say, hey, let's look at ranked choice voting. But we have a long history of runoff voting in this state, and it's kind of one of those things sort of in the blood. But I'm always open to anything that can make voting easier and better, because as much as I know people don't necessarily believe that, I know some of y'all know me and know this, I truly want everybody who wants to vote to be able to vote and vote for the candidate of their choice in the way they so choose. And I don't care what the outcomes are on that front.
Let me say something to back up Gabe too. So actually in DeKalb, we made a board decision 2-3 months back to actually not purge any voters, and I use that term purge. And so in DeKalb, we actually sent out the ballots to anyone who requested it, whether you're active or inactive, as a way to make sure that that we did not give up the optics that somehow we were actually keeping people from registering or getting a ballot, right? Yeah.
So we're 15 minutes over, and this has been such a wonderful. It reminds me of a George Cheedy D&D game. We got like 20 people here, all waiting for a turn to talk. So George Cheedy.
Hold on, a George Cheedy D&D game.
George Cheedy, yes.
Hey,
do you want to play? In? Do you want to join us?
Hey, wait a second, George, because you told me no. Don't be inviting anybody else.
No, second round. After I get the first one through.
Okay.
I haven't done it since like 6th grade, 7th grade.
Well, George is actually developing a D&D game based on the mythology of Africa, which is pretty interesting.
I'm such a nerd.
Yeah, D&D. Well, D&D is primarily comprised of Western white influences, and so it's really going to be neat to see. I unfortunately am in another D&D game and can't commit to doing that and every other thing that I do, but I'm looking forward to watching it, and I think we might actually stream it soon, which will be awesome. So I wanted to give
George, if you can get with Marjorie and get a Doctor Who angle in your D&D game, that would be awesome.
Yeah. All kinds of good things are happening in this room today. So I want to give everyone a chance to offer like a second or two of parting thoughts before we close down the stream. Gabriel, since we've mocked you and made fun of you for the first 30 minutes, I'm gonna all done out of love, I promise. We're gonna let you have a minute to talk, and then we're gonna kind of go around the room.
When you said you were teasing me earlier, you weren't talking about teasing that was coming on. You were literally teasing me without me in the room.
We were literally teasing you. That's right. So if you want to fire back at us, go for it.
No, listen, I appreciate the opportunity to come on to these kind of things, and I don't know if you have 8,000 people or 8 people watching, but I want to make
21.
sure the message is out there. 21. I want to make sure the message gets out there that the secretary in our office is doing everything we can to make voting easy as we possibly can. And, this isn't easy. And when we go to national groups and look at these things, it becomes, they see us getting beat up, and a lot of them have the same issues, but because of the background of the state, sometimes that happens. And I do want to make a quick announcement for people who are really insider geeks on this stuff. There's something called the Election Assistance Commission. And we had some bad news and great news. Our Deputy General Counsel, Kevin Rayburn, is now going to become the General Counsel for the Election Assistance Commission, which really oversees all of how voting in the United States is done and certifies machines and everything. He's going to be great at it. That's a really big loss for us. He's done a fantastic job in this state. I really hate to lose him. So Kevin Rayburn, I just want somebody to know how great he is and how much we're going to miss him when he leaves us in July. But y'all, bring me back again. I'm ready to answer questions, hardballs, softballs, whatever you need.
Yeah.
And I really just appreciate the time, Dan. And I apologize. I was in the car and I'm on an hour and a half of sleep.
Well, we appreciate you being willing to come back. We will definitely have you on. George, quick minute, parting thoughts.
I don't need a minute.
Okay.
Where did $15 million get spent?
Hans.
That's it.
Hans, parting thoughts.
Yeah, I'm not going to pick that one up from George. I think we all probably have a sense of it wasn't well. Gabe, thanks for coming on. I know I asked you some tough questions, but I really appreciate your honesty and transparency. And Georgia has deservedly earned a place of being looked at hard about this. And yesterday didn't go well for us. And so I just, like, my number one point on all of this is this cannot be what happens in November. Thank God it happened yesterday so that it doesn't happen in November. And let's do whatever we need to do to make sure that November goes smoothly.
Marjorie,
I'm with you, Hans.
Marjorie?
Yeah, so two things real quick. I'm going to respectfully, and I appreciate you took some tough questions, Gabe. I think one of the quick and relatively easy fixes that we can do to make to get rid of some of these lines is to, instead of requiring everybody, and I know you don't have time to answer me now, but let anybody go to any precinct in their county to vote. That's what we do with early voting. You can generate a ballot based on somebody's ID. And then if there's a long line at one precinct, somebody can drive down the road. Somebody can vote near their kid's school.
I'm going to answer real quick. We're working on that. We talked to the Democrats about it on Friday, but we are not opposed to that. It's a question of how you actually achieve it. So here you go.
Okay, that makes me really happy because I've always thought that's one of the simplest and quickest fixes. And the next thing I'm going to say is, everybody, please remember to go back out on August 11th. There's going to be a lot of really, really important runoffs and some down ballot races. Please go out there and please do your research. I love to elect more women, but don't necessarily just vote for the first female name on the ballot. So please get back out there August 11th and let's finish up this primary part before the main event in November.
John?
I just want to say to the community not to give up, that there are some quick fixes right in front of us. We should pressure the Board of Elections. I mean, not the Board of Elections, the DeKalb Board of Commissioners, and make sure that they are doing everything they can to make sure that the DeKalb Board of Elections has all the resources to carry out a really good, clean election. But we also must pressure the Board of Elections and make sure that they have contingency plans in place. When things go wrong, there has to be a plan in place to keep the operation going. And so I think that we, the people, if we show up to these Board of Elections meetings and if we show up to these Board of Commissioners meetings, we can have a lot of this stuff worked out so the runoff can go smoother and the general election can go smoother. Stay in the fight, don't give up, and keep voting.
Balki? You're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks. First of all, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to come here. And besides
hope you'll come
Hans,
back.
who can you hear me?
Yeah, I hope you'll come back.
Okay, absolutely. But I perhaps am the only one who is born outside of this country, and I do think that we are at a point in time where the extremes on either ends are kind of pulling it apart. So I think it's so important for us to all be in the same room together to talk about this, because I think it helps promote the education and disseminate information in a way that depoliticizes a lot of the issues that it's out there, right? So be glad to do it. And hey, Gabe, I'll tell my wife to send a resume again. I think she misses the office down there.
Well, Kevin just left, so if An needs something.
So we're gonna shut it down. Thank you all again. If you want to tune into our next Twitch show, it's going to be this Friday at 6. I don't know who the guests are, but we didn't have any problems getting guests today, so I hope our luck holds. Wanted to just really talk about something personal for just a second. There's a little girl that I know named Tiny who is really sick right now. She's 4 years old. She's really sick. I don't want to get too deep into it, but I call her Tenacious Tiny, and we're all rooting for her. We want her to get better so she can keep on being tenacious and fighting. So I just wanted to send some positive vibes Tiny's way. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for watching us, and we hope you will join us again this Friday for another episode of the Decatur-ish Twitch show. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan.